You know, I don't know if you know what an honor it is to come in here and fill in somebody's place in this pulpit. We who sometimes get asked to come and substitute consider this holy ground. And so we don't take it lightly. I give you my word on that. I don't know if I should make this confession or not, but I think I will. I think I need to. I had some world-class notes. I had some of the greatest notes in the world, and my printer wouldn't print them this morning. And it came up with this notation that said, the magenta cartridge needs to be refilled. And I thought, I'm not printing in magenta. Come on. And I kept trying. I don't know if you've ever begged a printer before, but it can be a humiliating experience. So I ended up scratching some things down on this piece of paper. And I'm not, hopefully I'll get through the way I had the notes. And the reason I'm making that confession is because if I reach a place where I'm not sure, and I'm looking down and I'm silent for a while, I have either lost my place or I'm being anointed by the Spirit. And I'm not going to tell you which. The common lectionary suggestion for today is out of Genesis 49, and as I looked at it, I began to think, if I read this text just like it is, it's going to have the excitement effect about the same as reading a phone book. So I'm gonna let my razor sharp brain change the rotation a little bit, and maybe you could call this doing it in reverse. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to 3 or 4 of the foregoing chapters, and I'm going to just skim over the top of some of that story. And it's a long story, it's a compelling story, but I give you my word, it's a good story. And so I want to just sort of give some of the salient points. You have to say that when you're talking for a preacher, because preachers love to say salient points. And so I'm going to go over the salient points of this story up till today. And then I'm going to read the text at the end. And then I'm going to make one comment after that. And then we're going to sing a hymn. And we can go home or to Rappahannock. Because if I stay in that story in its entirety, it'll take till 3 o'clock, and we can't do that. So I'm going to go back a little ways in this story that Genesis 45 is built around, and then I promise you the reading will make more sense. We'll go back to Jacob, moving to Canaan, moving to this happy and fair land of Canaan for the second time in his life. This will be the second time that Jacob has lived in Canaan. This time, he's got 12 sons and 1 daughter and 2 wives. So this will be his first time with that many mouths to feed. And they have established themselves this world-class farming operation, and everything is working very, very well for him, with the farms and all of these sons to do that work. The story's going to focus, as it turned out, on the youngest son, whose name is Joseph. Joseph is Jacob's youngest son, and he's his favorite son, which doesn't endear him that well to all of the other sons. And we get the hint with the scriptures that we read back in 4 or 5 chapters before, that the event today is celebrating his 17th birthday. So Joseph is 17. And Jacob gives him, among his birthday presents, he gives him, of all things, this amazing Technicolor dream coat, as Lord Weber would say. As King James says, a coat of many colors, which is long sleeve and goes all the way to his feet. The scriptures tell us that the sons are jealous. I can't help but think that at least 3 or 4 of them thought, when they looked at that thing, I'm glad I'm not the favorite. Joseph took his new coat of many colors. He put it on, and what turns out to be a little bit troubling is he feels like he needs to wear it everywhere he goes. He's always putting the coat on and wearing it. Now, one of the things that Jacob does for his favorite son, Joseph, is to not require him to do the chores that the others do. Well, that doesn't endear him to them either. So, sip of water time. So there is much enmity. And the scriptures, in fact, don't hold out. They say that they hate him. Sometimes Jacob will send him out to check on the boys to see how things are going. And if they're goofing off even the least bit, he will tell his dad. That doesn't endear him either. So he's taking a lot of steps backwards here. There is an important larger farm that they have. It's a couple of miles north toward Shechem from where their home is. And they have sheep and goats at this farm. They have some row crops. They have some fence and a barn that needs maintenance all the time. So it takes up a good part of the day for the boys to go there, for the 11 boys, to go there. On this day that they're up there, about late morning, Jacob says, Joseph, why don't you go out and check on your brothers and see how it's going? And he said, okay. So he gets dressed and puts on his, and starts out that way. And he's gone just a little ways, and it occurs to him he don't know where this farm is. And so he has to stop strangers and ask them for directions to the farm. Well, they finally get him there. And the guys involved in their work, they see him coming for a long, long ways off, because he kind of stands out. And they begin to grumble among themselves, look at him. Oh, and first thing you know, they've worked themselves into a dither. And so one of them, as they get to grumbling so much, says, let's kill him. And that group, they said, yeah, let's kill him. When you got one brother, Reuben, who sometimes has a little bit of common sense, and he says, no, stop that. We are not going to harm this boy at all. Just stop that. So they quit, and then they started, among themselves, well, we want to do something. And it turns out there's a pit at the edge of one of these fields that they work in. It's a pretty deep pit. There's no water in it, but it's deep and it's steep. A guy couldn't get out by himself. They say, let's throw him in this pit. Yeah. And so that idea grew. They stripped him of his, Technicolor tunic and dragged him over and threw him in the pit. Then they turn back around and one of them says, well, that's lunch. And so they start opening up their sandwiches and their chips and pickles and stuff, And one of those round corrugated coolers that looks like a mini silo, they got their tea in that. So they're just starting their lunch. And a caravan, an Ishmaelite caravan, comes slowly by, as happens quite normally there. So they see this caravan and they start this other idea about, That's what we'll do. Get a rope and pull him out of that pit, and we'll go sell him to those Ishmaelites in the caravan. And that's what they did. They sold him to this bunch for 20 pieces of silver. Then they came back. They finished their chores, and then they had one more diabolical plan to finish up. They took some blood out of a little goat in a syringe or something and rubbed it on that coat of many colors, added another color to it. And then they dragged it across the barbed wire fence for a while to make it look like it was involved, in foul play, and hatched this diabolical plan to go home and tell Dad that a savage beast has taken Joseph and devoured him, and there was nothing we could do. And I'm sure they played it up with the tears and stuff. It was awful. We couldn't do anything. We couldn't stop it. And we were so well, the old man went such aggressively into mourning and bereavement and weeping and wailing that it wasn't good for him. And it's just no question that they overdid things here, they took it too far. But they were too coward to tell him the truth. So they let it go, just like it is. They let it be. I'm upset. Well, the caravan comes into Egypt. And they come up to the palace. They come up to the house of this chief of Pharaoh's security guard, whose name is Potiphar. And I don't know how much they negotiated, but they sold their new slave to him as a domestic servant. Potiphar bought Joseph and introduced him to his household and said, "This is where you're going to work." Well, the scriptures tell us that God was with Joseph the whole time. And if God is with you, if God is for you, who can be against you? And wouldn't you know it, Joseph and Potiphar hit it off very well. They became instant friends, as well as all of the people around. Joseph really loved these people, and they loved him. And time after time, things worked in his favor, and it just looked so good. And you almost hate to say this, but I believe it was a good thing to get away from them brothers, So he began to mature. He began to really mature there. He studied their language. He learned their ways and their methods and their recipes. And Potiphar made him the captain of his household, which was enormous. He had an enormous mansion to take care of. But by all standards, he did it very, very well. He just took good care of things. He kept making friends all over the place, and everybody loved him. And he loved everybody. Man, just what a great thing has happened for him now as he's coming along and things are moving so well. And then, of course, as things always sometimes happen, it wasn't pleasant all the time. And it turns out that Potiphar's wife had designs on Joseph, and she approached him in a flirtatious manner a time or two, and he didn't want any part of it. And she came closer and closer, but he resisted, and it made her very angry. So naturally, her course was to tell her husband that he had made advances at her, made passes at her, and she was very upset. And of course, he had no choice but to fling him into prison, just like that. You say this is done, and now he goes to prison. One of those, y'all start the trial and I'll go get the rope kind of thing. It's sort of in advance, already figured out. Well, wouldn't you know it, we're told in these scriptures a good bit that God is with Joseph, and he made a lot of friends in the slammer. He did very well in there, and things went okay in there, year after year, and he kept thinking he was going to get some kind of a reprieve, but it didn't happen. But he was doing okay with his friends in there. Joseph, as you might remember, had a divine gift of interpretation of dreams. And some of the inmates would be having crazy dreams, and Joseph was able to interpret them for the guys. And he just kept being in a place where this is working out okay. I'm sort of enjoying myself. All of the land suddenly went into a famine brought on by a drought, and things were rough. Things were just really at a critical stage. And the Pharaoh began to worry a great deal. And all of a sudden, Pharaoh started having some strange dreams, which had to do with some arcane numbers that nobody could make any sense out of. And he said, somebody needs to tell me what these dreams mean. And somebody said to the Pharaoh, well, you know, there's a convict in there. He does some dream stuff. He said, well, go get him. So he brings him to the Pharaoh. Pharaoh carefully outlines what his dreams are. And Joseph interprets them to the letter. And he talks about some things that he says in these dreams, these numbers, and what they mean. And the more research he did, the more he realized that we've still got some reserve grain and food items in these storage houses. We've got a couple of small fields near water sources. And if we play by the rules very carefully, we can get this thing taken care of. We can have enough food for us that will get out of critical portion, and we can take care of ourselves, and we and our animals will survive. Pharaoh says, all right, you're in charge. He made him what we would call Secretary of Agriculture. And by this time, Joseph had matured so well, and he was so smart and had such a business acumen about him that he began to say, all right, let's get some crews to do this. Let's conserve all of the resources that we do have. Let's take whatever we can from the fields that we can get water to and make it last. But everybody has to cooperate, and everybody has to ration, and it has to be done, precisely. And then we can get this done. They were so excited that this man had come, and they thanked God that it looks like he's going to save us. Well, that's what happened. And pretty soon, it wasn't a whole lot, but it was enough that we can live with if we do what he says, if we conserve and we cooperate with each other. The first thing you know, they began to get prosperous enough to where they had enough to share with those outlying areas, to share the grain and the food that we have with the other people. Word got to Jacob back in Canaan, and he said, yeah, that sounds good. He says, I want 10 of you boys to go over and buy us some grain and some food. Didn't want to send the youngest one again because of what happened last time, So they came, and they showed up, and they were just having the marvelous business-like concept of selling this thing, and people would negotiate what they could bring and what they could pay for. And his brothers showed up when Joseph saw them there. Now get this. Get this. Joseph, water time again. Sorry. Joseph recognized his brothers, and he was filled with emotion, so happy, so glad to see his brothers. He could not contain his excitement to see them. I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I would have in that case, but he was. He was so delighted to see his brothers. Now here's another issue. They didn't recognize him, and I think there is one issue that that may take into play here, and that is the Pharaoh had a dress code among his department heads, and that is, proper apparel, no facial hair, and they shave their heads. I expect that contributed to their not being able to recognize him, but they didn't recognize him, and he messed with their heads a little bit. A couple of times he played some pretty rough practical jokes on them. I'm not sure what was driving him to do that, but maybe it just felt good to do so. But then when it came time to register for the amount of grain and foods that they could take, he worked with them. He worked with them on the platform and what they needed and what they could pay, and then decided, how much he was going to allow for them to have. And then he was just busting inside. He just was so frothing at the bit, is that the way you say it? That he wanted to spend some time with his brothers. So he asked that all of the other people in the area leave me alone with this group of boys right here. And they did. Everybody left. And that brings us to today. So let's see if reading this thing sounds better than the phone book. This is Genesis 45, 1 through 9. And Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. And then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him because they were terrified in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." And they came near, and he said, "I am Joseph, your brother." "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now you, therefore, do not be grieved or angry with yourself because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For these years the famine has been in this land, and there are still some years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to the Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all of the land of Egypt. Hasten and go back to my father, and say to him, Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me now, and do not tarry." And we think this going to work out everything well between them. And the scriptures later, if you want to read that, will mostly bear that out. Why, here's my profound statement. Ray likes to end everything with a profound statement. And that's this. There is infinitely more grace in forgiveness than in revenge. Amen.